And now it's time to call Ari Shavit for a very special interview.
Dr. Kissinger, thank you so much, first of all, for your patience. I think that except for your many achievements, which we all admire, we here can sit in calm and prosperity and relative security because of the alliance between Israel and America, because of the strength of the Israeli IDF, because of Israel's special, unique strategic abilities, because the 73 war ended the way it did, and because we have a peace process was launched immediately after that. All these 5 major achievements that shape Israel of today are your achievements. And I think I speak for everyone present here that we are deeply grateful for all you have done for this country. But now, let's get into the difficult issues and the challenging issues of the day. You've just received the Herzl Prize. You've been following the Zionist phenomena and the Jewish state since it was founded. When you look at Israel of today, are you worried? Do you see this great nation threatened?
And first of all, let me thank you and Professor Reichman and Alex Mintz for the honor you have done to me and to my family. For me to visit Israel and to engage in a dialogue about our common destiny has been an essential experience of my life. When one has gone through the period of the Holocaust and one sees the fragility of institutions, one develops an additional obligation to contribute in some way to a world of greater stability for everyone and of course greater security for the Jewish people. So it is in this spirit that I am here, and I want to express my appreciation and then to answer your question to the best of my ability. Am I worried about the fate of Israel and the Jewish people? Of course, it has been part of the Jewish destiny to live in precarious circumstances. But I have also seen how in a fragment of the Middle East, people of faith have managed to create a state and achieve both its security and its progress under conditions that were unimaginable when I first visited Israel in 1962. I have known, I think, every Israeli prime minister. Many of them have become close personal friends. The present situation of Israel is extraordinarily complex. On the one hand, Israel has achieved a level of security and of economic progress, which, as I pointed out, it was only an imagination 40 years ago when I first saw it. So on that level, Israel is in a strong position. At the same time, around Israel, a revolution is going on that has many components. A conflict between the Shia and the Sunni entities, a rejection in some of the countries of the institutions of the state, a challenge to the borders that were established at the end of the First World War, and an assault on the international system which has characterized the international world for decades. All of these events are going on around Israel. Some of the previously hostile Arab countries are now cooperating with Israel and Israel with them on specific aspects of this overall conflict. And all of this is going on while nuclear technology has entered the region and presents another set of dangers. So in the short term, the Israeli position is stronger than one has known it for many decades. In the long term, the Middle East, and within it, Israel, has to overcome a whole new set of challenges that will present both dangers and opportunities.
So thank you so much for that overall view. And if I may, let's try to take it a step further and go one by one over the issues that you referred to. And let me begin, if I may, with a subject that is now totally off the map, with Iran. Over a year ago, before the Vienna Accord was signed, you published a profound, comprehensive, and if I may say so, courageous essay in the Wall Street Journal, actually warning about the Iran deal, and analyzing many of the potential consequences of that deal. A year later, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic? Are you worried that by 2030 or 2035, Iran may go nuclear?
Well, of course, I am worried that Iran has not lost the capacity to develop nuclear weapons. And I pointed out in these articles some concerns I had about some of the implications of the agreement, the fact that it might create incentives to introduce nuclear weapons into the region by other countries, and what would happen as this agreement ran its course and the technology overcame the restrictions of the agreement. Those concerns were generally understood and are now generally admitted. But they are part now of the world in which we live, and one therefore has to address what the consequences will be if they should materialize. So, in a sense, I'm worried. On the other hand, I believe that the common interests of the United States and Israel and of the moderate Arab countries to prevent any country from achieving domination in the region, and especially developing a nuclear military capacity, to carry out its objectives, that this common goal to prevent this remains and should be strengthened as the years go on.
So if I may get a bit into this, actually there were two major concerns without getting into the details. One is the nuclear issue, which I'll get back to in a second. But one was of Iran actually becoming a hegemonic regional power, especially because of the weakness you described in the Arab world. Is that, before we go back to the possible nuclear scenarios, is that an alarming scenario that you see, of Iran really rising to a kind of position of almost unprecedented regional power as a regional hegemonic power?
Iran at the moment is conducting foreign policy on the basis of two basic principles. One, she is conducting it as a traditional state and claims the rights and protections of the United Nations system. At the same time, it is also conducting it as a center of jihadist and revolutionary activity by supporting non-state actors like Herzliya and to some extent Hamas in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Yemen. And therefore, any long-term agreement with Iran that does not limit that second strand of its policy means that the dynamic element that created the great fears has not been eliminated. And we can see that in the daily policy of Iran today. So the challenge remains whether it is possible for Iran to accept political restraints together with restraints in the military field. And if those two categories are not linked, then over a period of time, the situation will get more and more dangerous. At the same time, there is a possibility that Iran will learn the limits of its capabilities, provided the Western countries draw a clear line that prevents the continuation of the jihadist efforts.
So just to end on the Iran subject and get another point or angle, a personal one on the nuclear issue. Much of your life has been about preventing nuclear proliferation, even before you were in office. And you and your colleagues have succeeded beyond any expectations. You've actually, the international community has really kind of created a kind of post-Nagasaki miracle of preventing nuclear events from happening over more than 70 years. When you think about young people today, are you worried that later on, the 21st century, because of Iran or because of other issues, will see a process of renewed nuclearization and possible even nuclear events later on in the century, either as nuclear terror or inflicting nuclear horror?
The spread of nuclear weapons is one of the greatest challenges of our period, because the more they spread, the more likely they will fall into the hands of countries that do not have the technical capabilities for the restraint that was exercised when the superpowers possessed them, and secondly, which do not possess the restraints in the moral field that has so far inhibited the use of nuclear weapons. One of the major objectives of policy has to be to prevent nuclear weapons from becoming conventional armament and to reduce and eliminate the spread of nuclear weapons. And therefore, the rigid adherence to the Iranian agreement is an absolutely essential part of this policy.
Now, talking about the region, which you referred to before, we are obviously experiencing an unprecedented historical turmoil, the Sykes-Picot order crumbling, many of the modern Arab nation states disintegrating. In the short term, as you said, it's convenient for Israel because many of the old threats are gone. There is no Syrian army that will invade the Golan Heights. There's no Iraqi army. But in the long term, are you worried that this chaotic situation would endanger Israel?
Independent now of the fate of Israel, the turmoil that exists in the Middle East is very similar to the 30 Years' War in Europe, in which different countries and different groups are contesting with each other for different objectives and who sometimes cooperate in a limited way, and then it falls apart again. So the problem is to develop in the region a concept of stability whose basic principle all the nations accept, and to establish an equilibrium of power so that the aggressive countries and the jihadist countries can never be tempted to use their military capacities. That is a big task. And if you ask me, am I worried? I think it is a task that has to be met. It is not going to be easy, but it is absolutely necessary because there's no other way to have stability and peace in the region. So I use what I'm describing as a challenge to the statesmen in the decades ahead to do their duty, which is to bring greater stability, greater reliance on agreed moral principles to the conduct of diplomacy.
So talking of that, there is much talk of a regional peace initiative, of the opportunities actually created by this new reality when so many Arabs who are terrified of Iran, of ISIS, of Islamic Brotherhood are closer to Israel than ever before. Do you see this translated into a kind of regional peace? Can you see a regional peace conference convening soon, based perhaps on the Saudi or the Arab Peace Initiative that brings a regional peace?
Theoretically, this is a logical evolution. But I have, in my consideration of these issues over the decades, had a different approach. I respect the conviction of others, and I wish them well. And if a general negotiation can be achieved, I would welcome it. But I have believed that a step-by-step approach is usually preferable. First, in the present situation, if you assume that a regional peace would have as its component the states that existed when this crisis started or its successor states, you realize that a number of states are not in a position right now to undertake any regional peace initiatives. Syria, Iraq, Libya are not functioning as states. Iran would almost certainly be, at least in its present approach would have to make a huge transformation to accept Israel as a legitimate and permanent state. So if one asks oneself as to the members of such a regional agreement, it is not obvious how that can be achieved. So then, secondly, since any agreement has to be more than simply a piece of paper, but requires some guarantees, one would have to ask oneself which countries are in a position actually to extend guarantees and to implement them. And one sees the same dilemma that I mentioned about the creation of the agreement. So, yes, if a regional agreement could be made in which all countries accept the existing states as legitimate states, and if they all achieve a system of collective security to resist violations of the understanding, I would, of course, welcome it. But I believe that the inhibitions that I outlined will in practice prove a great obstacle. And I remember that the same question really already arose in the 70s, whether in the Carter administration we should proceed with a general negotiation or a step-by-step negotiation. And as it turned out, President Sadat of Egypt, one of the great men that I've had the privilege to meet, decided that a general conference had so many dangers of blowing up that he preferred a separate approach to Israel and undertook that historic visit to Jerusalem. So my view remains that we would be better off with significant interim agreements that showed progress, at least as a first step to an overall settlement. And that I have doubts about the composition of such a conference, its procedures, and its outcome.
If I may add, one part of your legacy is the kind of de facto peace agreement you hammered between Israel and Jordan in 1970, exactly because of these considerations. Do you think that that might be a kind of vision, a kind of de facto peace, regional peace, even if there are no conventions and signed agreement, but working on the mutual interests in order to create a peaceful reality, even if there are no signed agreements?
The problem of attaching the word final to an agreement is that it obliges a lot of countries to pronounce as an absolutely permanent feature of the international system something that they historically have considered a great sacrifice, and something that is in fact would be a good thing, but it makes the agreement more vulnerable to radical attacks. So I think that countries that are pursuing, that if one pursued limited but still major objectives, it would be easier for Arab countries to join that, leaving open that a final settlement would meet then other remaining concerns.
Let's move, if I may, to the Palestinian issue. For a while now. We've been trying to reach a final comprehensive peace agreement next year, several rounds lately, with the depth of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in mind, and again with the weakness and crisis of the Arab nation state. Do you think that a two-state peace agreement, final and comprehensive, can be reached in the foreseeable future?
Look, it is no secret in this conference that the United States is working on a concept of general peace for the region. And I don't think it's appropriate for me to start debating what has not yet been presented. My views are the ones that I have outlined here. And I will react to specific proposals when they are made. I'm not optimistic that the outcome can be negotiated this year or in the immediate future.
Well, I hope you see
but
us.
there are others who I respect who have a different view. And so I would have to state my views fully after I know what the concrete proposals are.
So I hope you see us. We stopped seeing you, but we hear you loud and clear. So we'll go on until hoping the picture will come back. But I would ask, just following that, assuming we take the more creative and more modest and realistic approach, what would a step-by-step approach regarding the Palestinian issue look like today? Where should it lead us?
Well, I'll be glad to outline that at the next Herzliya conference.
Okay, so
I think obviously an interim solution has to produce significant increase in the ability of the Palestinian population to feel that the existing security arrangements are compatible with their dignity. But it must also have a major element of security for Israel. So I think we should defer the details to a future conference.
So just two areas before we end this fascinating conversation. One has to do with Israel's relationship with the West. Part of the genius of Zionism that we had deep strategic alliances with leading Western powers, first the British, then the French, and then this amazing alliance with America, first forged by Levi Eshkol and Lyndon Johnson, and then the amazing work you did with Richard Nixon, Golda Meir, and Yitzhak Rabin to forge it in your time. Are you worried that this deep alliance is eroded, that there are changes in America and perhaps in Europe that creating a deeper rift between the Jewish state and the Western world?
I think as far as the United States is concerned, the major leaders of both parties retain the essential commitment to the security and progress of Israel. In Western Europe, there is now a growing tendency in the public discussion to see Israel almost in a position comparable to that of Vietnam, of being itself a cause of the upheavals. This is not the case among the leaders, but in the public discussion, Israel is in a less advantageous position, at least in some in some of the countries. And Israel, in its own conduct, has to take care to analyze what some of these concerns are, to avoid measures that, however important they are, create additional rifts. But the long-term attitude towards the Jewish state has become more ambiguous among the public than it has been, though I would say not yet in America.
You grew up with anti-Semitism. Do you fear that we are experiencing a comeback of anti-Semitism?
Well, the anti-Semitism where I grew up had a ferocity that has not yet been manifested itself. But I think that the recognition of the extreme inherent insecurity of the Jewish people, that, say, the generation in Germany that experienced the war had acquired, I think that special sensitivity is eroding.
So now as a last question, you're not an Israeli, obviously, but you love Israel, and as we said, you contributed a lot to Israel. Facing all these challenges we discussed and the ones we did not, do you have any general advice, words of guidance for this nation and for the future leadership of this country?
Look, it was my obligation to conduct the foreign policy of the United States in terms of values that the American public could share, and therefore the security of Israel and the future of Israel had to be related closely to American objectives. And the challenge throughout will remain that the basic goals of the two states remain linked. Now, the challenge this is to both states is, I think, in part the following. When one has to visit Israel to understand what it means to live in a country which you can traverse by car from its furthest point east-west in less than 2 hours. On one of my visits to Israel, a distant relative brought 2 of her children to see me, and they were in uniform and they were stationed, and I asked her how she could collect them so quickly, and it turned out they were about half an hour away at a border stationed from where she lived. So that is an experience Americans don't ever have. And so therefore, the extreme sensitivity with which Israelis conduct negotiations is very hard to understand for Americans, so that some issues are maddening for American negotiators. On the other hand, Israelis have to understand that there is a need for American leaders to integrate their concerns into a greater Middle Eastern concept, and not just these are the obstacles that have existed between the two sides and will exist again as negotiations achieve momentum. And I think it is essential for both sides to have compassion for the dilemmas of the other, and for Americans to remember that Israel is a very small nation with a very small population, so that sacrifices that seem minor to Americans are proportionately huge for Israel. And that is the sense that has to be cultivated as we go through this period. And we are now going through an election. And I think it is essential for people on both sides of this election to remember that there are certain key issues that are central to the peace of the world and to the values of America. And what we are discussing is one of the most important.
So what you are actually saying, your major advice is that if we are to survive in this difficult, violent neighborhood, we must understand America better and be in very close ties with it.
I have tried to sketch that I think this is an extremely dangerous neighborhood, that it is going to undergo in the next decades extreme upheavals, and that it is necessary to distill out of these tensions a sense of general peace that has to become an objective of American policy. Within that, the state of Israel, which has reflected the basic values for which America has stood, is a test case of the validity of whatever overall policy we conduct. So we have to, as Americans, conduct a general Middle East policy within which there has to be a close understanding between Israeli leaders and American leaders, not only about their formal positions, but about the intangible values that make the formal positions worthwhile.
Dr. Kissinger, thank you so much for this interview and for your life's work for America, for the world, and for Israel.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. I think it was a very inspiring and strong interview. And I'd like to thank all the people who made it possible, and especially René-Pierre Herzliya, Aryeh Bourkoff, and Benjamin Haddad. Thank you very much to all of you.
Aaron.